This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Greetings and welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, my regular co-host, Timothy Renner, will be my guest, also host, of course, of Strange Familiars. And we're going to be talking about his book, his latest book, Bigfoot West Coast Wild Men, a history of wild men, gorillas, and other hairy monsters in California, Oregon, and Washington State. And it's a short but fun book. It's a collection of newspaper articles from those areas back in the 1800s and early 1900s. It has some really interesting stuff in it. So we're going to go over all of that. And to follow up what I said last week about the show on strange light phenomena, we are planning a third show, and we're going to be talking about your encounters as well, as I have a nice collection of people who have messaged me with their own personal accounts of weird light phenomena. As well, maybe we'll get into some other aspects we didn't get a chance to touch on in that whole 3 hours of conversation, because there's just so much to it. All right, without any further ado, here's my talk with Tim. All right, Tim, welcome back to the show.
Always great to be here.
And instead of a roundtable guest, this time you are just a guest.
All by my lonesome.
We're interviewing you. And you have your latest book out. I hesitate to call it new because it's been out for how long now?
Oh my goodness. It's really bad that I don't remember when it came out. It came out late fall. Or no. It was January. Sorry, January.
Okay. All right. So not that bad. A couple months ago. Bigfoot, West Coast Wild Men. This is a collection of newspaper articles from California, Oregon, and Washington. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of the continuation from my Bigfoot in Pennsylvania book. It's the same idea. I'm just moving to other locations.
And how come you jumped to the West Coast?
Because I thought there would be a ton of stories there. I ended up, it wasn't that the case. There's a lot less in those 3 states, newspaper stories we're talking about, than there was in all of Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, could part of that be that Pennsylvania had been more thoroughly settled at that point than the West Coast?
I think that's part of it. There was more people to see things, and there were more newspapers to report them. Pennsylvania had a lot of newspapers very early on, and there just weren't that many newspapers out west.
Yeah. It's still an interesting compilation. And how do you look these up? Do you go to the library?
Just newspaper archives. For the Pennsylvania one, I could actually go to different historical societies and so forth and get in their archives. But obviously this is on the West Coast, so I'm bound to different newspaper archives.
And those are online?
Yeah, most of them are at this point. Yep.
Okay. So it's just a matter of scrolling through articles and seeing what stands out.
Yeah, it's a lot of eye strain and many hours spent scrolling. And I like to point out that I don't throw everything in the book that just says wild men, because a lot of times wild men are human beings in these articles. They'll call a guy who's got long hair and a beard, they'll call him a wild man, or maybe a homeless guy, they'll call him a wild man. So for every one story that could be a Bigfoot, I throw out at least 20 probably that are just normal humans. You can tell from either they were speaking or they ended up in a county home, or for one reason or another, you could tell for sure it was a human. So I toss out unless they're very strange and interesting for some reason. Some of those get in if they're just a little weird or something. I'll throw them in there. But for the most part, they go out the window.
And this is not as simple as just searching for one term either. I mean, the term Bigfoot wasn't even around.
Yeah, no. It's searching for terms, and then it's weeding through and finding what the right things are. And it takes a long time. If I didn't love these old articles, I would probably go insane. But I do love them, and I still, I'm continuing. I'm moving along to other parts of the country after this. Hopefully, I'll do the whole country in sections here. And
Nice.
I find I still love reading these articles. After collecting this many, but it is there are some nights of eye strain where I just have to put it down for a bit.
Um, and you mentioned something that Avril Seal mentioned when he was on. Hope I got his name right. Which is that some people use the term Bigfoot with a capital B as if it's a singular creature. This never occurred to me. Like to think that people actually think there was just one creature was not a concept that I think ever entered my mind, because that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. Yeah, especially given the where it's seen. I mean, it's seen everywhere, every state except Hawaii, I think. All over the place. Um, all over the world. These hair covered bipedal things are seen. So yeah, I intentionally do not capitalize it. I think I'm one of the few people who don't, because you don't capitalize human or wolf or any other species when you write about them. And I also insist on using Bigfoot as the plural of Bigfoot. You'll
Mm-hmm.
see variants of Big Feet and Bigfoots and like that, but to me, they're very awkward. All of that is very awkward. I think it's much easier just to use Bigfoot as the plural, like deer.
Yeah, well, that makes sense to me too.
Oxford hasn't weighed in on it yet. When they do, I guess we'll have an answer. But until then, I'm gonna stand on my own spelling and pluralization there.
Because when you say things like big feet or big foots, it doesn't sound right.
No, it doesn't. I just it seems awkward too to write it. Just reading it. As a writer, and like that just seems awkward to me.
I mean, I guess saying a pack of Bigfoot doesn't quite sound right either.
No, and I'll find I often will put creatures after it to clarify Bigfoot creatures
Mhm,
or
mhm.
something similar. But sometimes I'll throw it in and just use the Bigfoot as the plural.
Um, and these are usually denoted as wildmen, but sometimes gorillas, monkeys, and a host of other things in there too.
Yeah, ape men, hairy giants. There's all kinds of stuff. It's wild men in the 1800s and before, mostly because they didn't have a name to call it other than a wild man. There's a little bit of confusion, I think, of the idea of the theory of evolution, which was fairly new at that time. And I think they had the idea that if you gave up on society and walked off into the woods, you would grow hair all over your body and become a wild creature. So if they saw something that was vaguely human shaped and covered in hair, they just assumed, oh, that's a wild man. Later on,
Hmm.
after the discovery, not really the discovery, but after people in the West started to know of the mountain gorilla, then they had a name to call it. They started seeing pictures, and some zoos, although very few zoos had them. We can talk about that too, with the
Yeah.
the idea that a lot of people say, oh, they were escaped gorillas. There weren't that many. But once people started seeing these gorillas in the few zoos that had them, or the few traveling shows that had them, Barnum had one. I think the New York Zoo had one, and very, very few other places had gorillas back at this time.
And and,
Uh,
and if a gorilla were to escape, I mean, those, as you point out in the book, they're valuable. They're not just
oh
going to
yeah,
be like, oh well, we lost our gorilla. They're going to find the gorilla.
yeah. It was something like the equivalent of $500,000, I think, at the time to buy one. And the equivalent in today's money. So this was no small purchase, and not that many places could even afford them. So you hear these stories all over the country, these explanations for these escape gorillas. Oh, a circus train crashed, and Allison, my wife, is actually she's kind of a circus historian of sorts, and there are certain train crashes. Well, she can pretty much track down all the circus train crashes. So a lot of these places
Hmm,
that are claiming there were circus train crashes, it didn't happen. I mean, they made the news when circus trains crashed. It made the news all over the place.
hmm. And but I mean, that's par for the course for people who just want to dismiss things. It doesn't matter if you can back up what you're saying, as long as it sounds more rational than what the original account does.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
You
and
know,
I think there's one in the book pretty early on that talks about escaped orangutans or something that they thought it was some orangutans had escaped from a ship at some point, and then the guy who's actually writing the article is like, well, how did it have a mate? Because it saw a male and a female. Like,
right.
it just didn't make sense that one orangutan, I think they said, escaped from the ship, and then he saw two of them together.
um, and you have the singular monkey story where there was actually an escaped monkey.
Yes, yeah, I think that was in it was somewhere in Washington State, and I've run into a couple of them. I printed this one because it was in the area of that I was speaking of, but in the course of doing the research, I found a few kind of across the country of these instances where a monkey really did escape, and it talks about the trainer coming back after it. He came back, to find it because they were valuable, they were expensive, and they wanted their monkey. So they didn't just let him go and forget about it.
They wanted their monkey. But yeah,
The other thing that happened was there's another kind of wild man as well. Speaking of circuses, in the sideshow, they would often have people. Sometimes these were people from other cultures, from Fiji or these, at the time exotic native cultures, or sometimes they were just Americans that would dress up in crazy outfits, and they would call them wild men, and they would tour with the circuses. And I found some stories that every now and then the wild man would escape and run around the carnival grounds. And I think that was done to, just to thrill the audiences and stuff. But it's made me wonder, having run into a few of those stories, it's made me wonder if some of this idea of the escaped gorillas has come from these old wild men shows, where it seemed like towards the end of the carnival, they somehow the wild man would escape and they'd make a big show about he'd chasing people around and then they'd get him back in the cage.
and of course that back in the 60s and 70s and I guess even into the 80s kind of translated into the professional wrestling ring, where you had the occasional wild man wrestler.
Oh yeah, yeah. I met George the Animal Steel.
Yeah, there you go.
He was a super nice guy.
Yeah.
That was he was really neat.
But you had him, and even after that, you had Sabu, who they brought out to the ring in a Hannibal Lecter mask.
Yeah.
Who was just supposed to be nuts, and that's that sort of gimmick lived on. I mean, because professional wrestling kind of took a lot from the circus, the sideshow, that whole type of thing. Even a lot of the terminology used in wrestling, it comes from carnivals and stuff.
I hadn't thought about that. I've been collecting some of the photos of those old wild men, the circus wild men, just because I'm spending so much time on wild men. I thought, well, I'll start collecting these, but I didn't even think about the wrestlers. I'm going to have to start picking those up too.
It's just one of those things that carried on. You don't see it so much now, but up until like the 80s and stuff, you still saw it pretty prominently. You had those like the Moondogs and stuff like that were the wild man wrestlers.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're right. And that's the direct inheritance of the sideshow.
Yep. So the thing that always interests me in these Bigfoot accounts is how varied the descriptions are on them.
Yeah,
I mean, not just these, but even modern Bigfoot accounts.
That's what I was going to say. We get that today too. They're all over the place. Which is very frustrating for people who'd like it to be, an ape in the woods or a relic hominid, when you have these vastly different reports of size and appearance and so forth. The common thing seems to be they are upright most of the time and covered in hair, all of the time.
Hmm. Yeah, most of the time they do run on all fours.
Yeah, yeah, and again, we get reports of that today where it'll be upright, and it seems like when they want to really move, they'll drop to all fours, and that's when they can really move.
Now, can a man do that? Like if they were in the wilderness long enough, could a man run on all fours quicker than he could run on two legs? Because it seems like we're disproportionate that way.
Yeah, that I don't know. I think some some acrobatic, movie people have figured it out. I saw something on it, but in general, our arms are too short, I think.
Yeah, that's what I would think. And the hair thing, like we wouldn't grow the same type of hair, but I think if we were exposed to the elements, I mean, much like cats and dogs do, if they're outside in the cold, they do grow a little more hair, but they don't grow hair where they normally wouldn't have hair. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
cats and dogs obviously are pretty covered to begin with, but I think our hair might expand a little bit, but you're not going to get hair in places we normally wouldn't have hair.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to end up with 4-inch long hair on your arm.
No, but it might fuzz out a little bit.
Well, at one of these days, I'm probably going to give up and go off into the wilderness, and then I'll let you know.
It seems like someone should have studied this by now. There's probably a study out there somewhere that talks about the changes in someone's biology if they're out in the wilderness long enough.
I'm sure there is.
And that would be interesting to look at if we could find that. Just to see, like how much can someone change being out in the elements for 5 years, Yeah. It's not going to happen overnight.
No. But I don't think I think maybe your hair would change. But I don't think, like you said, I seriously doubt you'd start growing hair where you didn't have it.
Yeah.
It might thicken up in places where you already have hair. I again, that's so outside of my realm of expertise.
We should do a search for that at some point.
Yeah.
See if we can find someone who studied it. The behavior of these things is pretty standard across the board. It seems like, including killing livestock and things like that. The way they can like run up hills.
That's become one of probably the most convincing thing for me. There a lot of people, often people who consider themselves to be cryptozoologists. They put that name on themselves. They will tell you that witness reports don't matter because they're not science. And for me, though, when they're describing not only the appearance of these things, which is interesting, I like reading that, but over the course of writing these 2 books now, the behavior has become so interesting to me, and to me, the most convincing thing, because behavioral science is a thing. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about behaviors of these creatures that, these are people who didn't have access to the internet. There weren't books written about Bigfoot back then. They didn't know what they were, but they're describing these same behaviors that people describe today.
Yeah. And across vast areas of, well, all the reports.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's become my favorite part. I just, for some reason, that's become so interesting to me. And they talk about them, attacking dogs, or the fact that dogs won't track them. The window peeking in people's windows, or following them back. If you attack them, if people shoot them, or somehow get into a confrontation with them, a lot of times they'll follow them back to their home. That's reported today. It's I say the creatures kind of have a culture of vengeance. It seems like if you shoot one, they're gonna get you.
It seems like, as every time I read these, I can kind of see why people thought some of the missing 411 cases could be these creatures, whatever these creatures may be, because I see those comparisons that I didn't see so much when I first read the missing 411 books, because I've never been that into the whole Bigfoot thing. Like, I thought it was interesting, but I never seriously researched it. And as I'm reading your books and other books, I'm seeing those connections here and there. And
it's the accounts where they either attempt to or try to lure children.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. The accounts where they do take people are equally disturbing. But to me, for some reason, when it's children involved, it's very disturbing.
But not only that, there were a few other things, and I'm trying to remember what they were. A few other things that struck me as being connected. I mean, obviously, you get them around berries, and that was one of David's initial things is that a lot of these disappearances happen around berries. There's a number of cases where, what kind of, like the bramble type of thing, that these creatures would be hiding in that type of a thing, and that's where a lot of the missing people are found.
Yeah. I just draw a blank on what I was going to say, but
Well, it doesn't explain it all. No, I mean, but I think there's an element of this, whatever this is, no matter what you want to believe it is, that connects into at least some of those cases.
yeah. And again, we might be, and we talk about this a lot on the roundtables and so forth, but this might be just another manifestation of the other, and so we might
Right.
be talking about another aspect of the same kind of thing. So if it is a supernatural element that is taking people, maybe sometimes it is in the form of a gray alien, and other times it's in the form of a Bigfoot, and other times it's in the form of some strange sentient mist or whatever whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the stories in here. Let's start with Dead Man's Hole.
Yeah.
The
This
name
is a
alone, the name alone is great.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The other thing you find is a lot of names like Dead Man's Hole, Devil's Canyon,
Hmm.
you know, Devil's Peak, and David Paulides reports that as well. Like all these sort of sinister names are often associated.
Yeah, and he was by no means the first person to make that connection. I mean, that's something that's been reported for quite some time by different
Yeah,
people, including other people researching Bigfoot, but also like Andrew Collins, following in his book Light Quest, he talks a lot about how the devil names follow the anomalous spots on the planet.
yeah. I think Lauren Coleman pointed out in the 70s or so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been noted. So
So
yeah,
let's talk about Dead Man's Hole.
Dead Man's Hole was this. It was a sort of an isolated hollow outside of San Diego in northern San Diego County. Um, it was a stagecoach stop. They'd stop to water the horses there, and over the years, a lot of dead bodies turned up there. In 1888, there were at least 7 human corpses found in the area, and many of them were found beaten and strangled.
Mm.
So. Um, I don't know. Do you want me to read the article or just hit the high points? Or
It's your choice.
well, we can just hit the high points. So
Okay.
basically, this talks about 2 hunters who go into this Dead Man's Hole area, and they encountered a creature. So first, they note that they hear a eerie silence, which again is reported today in many sightings. People will talk about the woods just going dead quiet
Well, it's the Oz
before.
factor.
Yeah. But it was interesting that they noted that, and then so we'll pick up in the article. These hunters have gone in the canyon, so they see something kind of ahead of them. At first, they think it's a bear. An immense, unwieldy animal that, from a rear view, resembled a bear, was making rapid strides through the narrow dell. Its legs were long, and they were used with such ease and facility in climbing over the rocks and logs that, on second thought, the animal appeared more like an immense gorilla. Its hair was dark brown, and it was at least 6 feet in height. The front legs, from their use, resembled arms, and the beast moved almost uprightly, like a man or a monkey. His body was quite round, and covered with extremely long hair, much unlike the hair of any animal. The hind legs or feet, from the knees down, were the most peculiar features about this strange being. They were extremely broad and long, and the insides of them, upon which the animal walked, were entirely bare of hair. Every time it made a move, it exposed to view the bottom of its immense paws. Except for the hair, the arms and hands of the beast greatly resembled those of a human being. The body was large and round and entirely devoid of a tail. So they track this thing, and the one guy takes aim at it once, and I think it disappears, and then they see it climbing a cliff. It's climbing towards a cave. So he takes a shot at it and drops it. It falls down onto a boulder, and we'll pick up with the article again. The face was exposed to view as it lay on its side on the rock. The features were unmistakably Indian in character. The hairs on the face were few and black, and on the head it was long and jet black, like that of an Indian. The skin of the face was very dark and wrinkled. The teeth, which were partially exposed by the position of the mouth, were plainly those of a carnivorous animal. They were longer than those of a human being. This was the only feature of the face and head that did not exactly resemble the characteristics of an Indian. Perhaps the most singular point about the strange creature was the disproportion between its head and body. The former was not larger than that of an ordinary man, yet the body would weigh 400 pounds. The long muscular arms were provided with a pair of hands almost exactly like those of a man. There were 5 fingers on each hand. The outside of the fingers were covered in hair, but on the inside the skin was bare and white and thickly calloused in places. The feet, if such they could be called, were entirely unlike anything the hunters had seen. They were 2 feet long and 8 inches broad, and covered on the bottom with a hard substance like that of a dog. The being was of the male sex. It was evidently a cross between an Indian and some carnivorous animal. Such monstrosities, anthropologists say, are often born into the world, and many of them are mentioned in natural history. So they go on and they go to the cave where he was headed, and they find in the cave that it was a large apartment, not more than 10 feet from the outside. It had evidently been dug out of the earth by hand. In the dim light, it could be seen that the room was empty. Cox struck a match, and by its blaze, all the mysteries surrounding the murders in Dead Man's Hole were revealed. In one corner was a pile of bones, among which were portions of human skeletons. 5 human skulls were lying together. The half-man and half-beast was evidently also a semi-cannibal. So the description's pretty incredible. When it walks and they talk about seeing the bottom of its feet, if you're familiar with the Patterson-Gimlin film, you can see the bottom of Patty's feet when it walks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the hard callous bottom, that's reported by witnesses today who get close enough to see it. They say it's almost like a dog's foot on the bottom. Very, very interesting. So I had someone write me after I was on another show, and they said, well, that Dead Man's Hole story has been proven false. It was a hoax. I didn't. First of all, not every one of these newspaper articles, but a good portion of them, 50% or so, you will find other newspapers commenting on them, and they will just say, "Oh, the article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times last week, that was a hoax. They didn't know it was a bear," and they'll just kind of come out and call the other paper hoaxers or liars or whatever. That was very, very common. So I don't really do a lot of research on the opposing views on these. What's interesting to me is the stories themselves, because if you're looking for opposing views, you'll find them.
Sure.
I did find after the book was published, I always find stories afterwards, and being a completist, it drives me crazy. But I did find a follow-up article that said they took the body into town for display after that, but then there's no other mention after that what happened to it.
And I mean, it's weird that they're so insistent that it's essentially human, but just like not quite right.
Yeah, well, David Paulides, before he wrote the Missing 411 books, he did the Hoopa Project, which was a lot of Bigfoot research, and he had a very well-known sketch artist who was a police sketch artist who witnesses would have him sketch people so they could identify these criminals. So there's a guy who really knew the human face. He had him come in and he had him draw what the witnesses explained to him, and then he had him sort of take the hair off. And when you took the hair off of these, at least the creatures in California that they were describing, they looked like Native Americans.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's he did some really interesting work with that. I think it's called the Hoopa Project.
All right. You notice a lot of sarcasm in some of the reports here, and that's kind of that dismissal sort of thing. Some of it's actually pretty funny, honestly.
Yes, yeah. There's some good zingers in there, but I always point out that this also continues today. It's hard to find an article, and this not just with Bigfoot, anything with the paranormal.
Oh yeah.
If you find a modern article and they don't slide in a joke or a reference to the X-Files or something like that, it's very, very rare. It's always done I think it's sort of the reporters like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, yeah, I'm reporting on this crazy stuff, but I don't believe it,
It's the
it's a way
ridicule
to,
factor, yeah.
yeah, it's always, almost always there, even today, you'll find it.
And I think that is one of the things the New York Times article back in December did sort of change that dialogue a little when it came to UFOs with at least some people, where you were seeing a little more. You didn't
Hmm.
have the wink wink nudge nudge when they reported after that, because they're like, oh, something official actually came out and we can now report on this without doing the wink wink nudge nudge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
As much as I'm not impressed by what they released, it that is the one thing it did change, is it did change the attitude, at least to some of the news reports, and that ridicule factor was kind of removed to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to see if that spreads to other things in the paranormal world.
I would think not.
Yeah. It's unlikely. I really doubt I'll ever see a Bigfoot report without some sort of, you know.
Uh, unless we get some kind of small disclosure that, well, the United States government has been studying, ape-like creatures in the Pacific Midwest.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I don't hold my breath for that. I don't hold my breath for someone bringing in a body. Um, I just don't think it's going to happen. And I believe these things are real. I'm not saying they're not real. I absolutely believe people are seeing very physical things that leave footprints and hair behind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just don't think we're going to get a body.
I think, as much as some people may think saying it's real is crazy, I think it's crazier to say that you have a history of sightings all over the world that goes back into native cultures, and it's all being made up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Because all you need is for one report to be true.
oh, that too. Yeah. But I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that there's so much consistency and it goes back through centuries,
Oh yeah.
um,
Yeah.
through different
And,
cultures and everything else, says that they're seeing something. It doesn't tell us what it is, but they're seeing something.
right. Yeah. And too many trained observers, both in these old reports and new ones. Too many. I like to say that, if you were living out west in the 1800s, you're either come from very tough stock, you went out there on your own, or you're maybe the children of people who did. These were not wimpy people that were living out there. So when these miners who are otherwise out in the woods for extended periods of time by themselves with bear and with mountain lions and with all kinds of wildlife, when they report being terrified of these creatures,
Yeah.
there's something to me. There's something to that, because it had to take a lot to scare those guys.
So let's talk. And this is one of the ones that has that sort of missing 411 feel. Uh, the one where a wildman steals a woman right off of a mule.
Oh yeah, yeah. And she is reported later as being uh, insane, I believe.
Yeah, unable to talk about what happened to her. And again, that matches up with some of the missing 411 reports that when people come back, they don't know what happened to them. They don't remember. They don't have a clear, answer to where they were.
Yes, yes. It says, yeah. It is doubtless the same who terrorized tourists in the early part of the present decade, when he distinguished himself by snatching a young lady from a mule in the presence of her companions and disappearing in the thick timber at the southwestern base of Mount Dana, evincing Herculean strength and wonderful agility. She was found by a search party next day in a half-demented condition, unable to give a lucid account of her experience, but no trace of her abductor could be discovered. And that, again, there's a few modern cases where people have been found, supposedly after post-abduction, and they've been, pretty mentally changed. They've ended up in homes and so forth. Not to mention a lot of people, even with very, very brief sightings, will report almost as kind of post-traumatic stress.
Hmm. And that's interesting. I mean, I guess I could see it because it's an unknown, and the unknown definitely frightened people. But it to me, it almost suggests that there's something more going on than just an animal.
Right, because I mean I've seen a mountain lion in Maryland, very close to the farm where I grew up, which they're not supposed to be there. If you ask the Fish and Game and so forth, they'll tell you that they're not in Maryland. Um, I've seen it there. I know people who've seen them in York County, where I am now. Pretty shocking thing, but I don't have nightmares about it for the rest of my life. I don't, I can't say I had any form of post-traumatic stress. It was like, whoa, there's a mountain lion. Holy heck, there's, who knew? Who knew they were here? Uh, People see bears, even grizzly bears and so forth, even very aggressive polar bears. People will not have this kind of lifelong, a lot of these Bigfoot witnesses and one local guy I know of, he has had nightmares since 1973, I believe,
Oh,
on the regular. He it took me 6 months to kind of draw the story out of him, and when I did, he said, the next time I called him, I'd call him, once a month or so. Next time I called him, he said, "Man, I had nightmares for 2 weeks after talking to you."
oh.
And I think his girlfriend didn't much like me calling him because apparently he'd have nightmares and stuff after he talked to me. But yeah, so 40 some years of nightmares.
Damn. Um, there's one section that has a few articles in here that they're referring to whatever this is as a what is it, and I thought that was kind of perfect,
Well,
because
that comes. A lot of these names do come from sideshows. The what is it was Barnum started that, and I forget
okay.
exactly. That's a question for Allison. If she was awake, I'd ask her. I don't remember what the what is it referred to. It was something in Barnum's sideshow, I believe. But the newspapers kind of picked up on that term, so you'll find that all over the place as well.
But
They'll
it's
call
such
it
a
the
perfect
what is.
term for these things.
Yeah, yeah.
But you want to go a little bit into the what is it?
Remember what the page that was? That
Yeah,
was
it was 25 is one of the page around that area.
okay. Here we go. The what is it? Seen once more, it is not reformed yet. Once more, the wild and woolly what is it has been seen. It does not seem to have reformed as yet, as it is as frisky as ever. This time, the person who saw it was a Mr. Herman Gilbert, who was up in the head of the Capay Valley looking for a suitable piece of government land that he might homestead. He says that he was near Rumsey, where he was stopping with some friends. When last Monday morning he started out with his brother-in-law, expecting to be gone a day or so, as he wished to combine business with pleasure. They came to a nice little valley about a half-mile long on Tuesday afternoon, and as it was cool, well-watered, and full of nice green grass, they determined to pitch their tent there. This they did, and about half an hour later Mr. Gilbert went to the spring nearby to water the horses, and was surprised to see around it tracks very much like those resembling a man, but thought nothing of it. Incidentally, when he returned, he mentioned it to his brother-in-law. He then, for the first time, heard the terror, and suggested that the two return and track the mysterious animal to its lair. This they did, and as they followed the footprints, they found that they led to the other end of the valley. Just as they came to the end of the defile and were about to turn down the mountainside, they heard a peculiar cry, half human and half brutish, and quite near them. As may be supposed, they wended their way very carefully and slowly. Before they had gone half a mile, they came upon a path. The gentlemen were too sharp to walk in it, and followed in the direction it took by walking the underbrush nearby. Just as they reached the bottom of the mountain, they came into a deep ravine, and there, walking up and down, could be seen his Nibs himself. Mr. Gilbert says the beast seemed to be mad at something, and would beat its breast, which was covered with gore, and the sound made thereby was like distant thunder. It had it had lost some hair since last seen, so the gentleman should judge, for the cuticle was plainly discernible, and was of a dark color, much like that of a horse. Nearby was a rude cave where the anomaly lived. About it could be seen bones from the flesh had been eaten. The stench arising from the decaying matter was horrible. The muscles of the creature were very powerful, and the creature made an exhibition of its strength once by lifting a huge rock that would weigh at least 300 pounds and throwing it, without any apparent effort, 100 feet. After watching the what is it for some time, the gentleman crept quietly back, and as soon as possible left the locality, determined not to make acquaintance with the Capet curiosity.
Now, I think following that, maybe it was on the next page, that they continue to talk about that, and they state that people are, afraid of this thing and afraid to go out, and also afraid that they might be struck by a meteor.
Yeah, yes. It, and I included that because of the strange, lights in the sky. I don't know if they're talking about a meteor as we know a meteor, or if there's anything they see in the sky, a light, maybe they call it a meteor, just like they call these creatures gorillas or wild men or whatever. But when you talk about strange lights in the sky and Bigfoot, I had to include that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because you don't. Did it? How? What? You don't have it right there. What exactly it says?
The
The
Let me
way
try
it's
to find.
phrased is interesting.
Yeah, I have to find the actual article.
Because it sounds like people have actually been hit by something. And yeah, here it is. People around here are afraid to travel the roads above here after sunset for fear of meeting the what is it or getting struck by a meteor. Um, strange monsters and falling bodies are getting more numerous and bolder each day. It could also, I wonder if it could also be that this thing is throwing rocks at them.
Yeah, which is very common. Again, that's another one of these behaviors you just see again and again. And in the last article I read, of course, was in there.
So, I mean, that's entirely possible that people are getting boulders hurled down at them, and that's what they're calling meteors.
That's true too, as well. Yes.
So, but it's interesting. I wish there was a little more information.
That's the thing with a lot of these articles, and neither reporter nor witness is alive, so it's not like we can go back and ask them.
Yeah,
What did you mean by
exactly.
that?
And I like that there's an odd little comment on one of them that says talking about a wild woman. You do have some wild woman accounts in here,
Yes.
and it says this could not possibly be a lady unless she was from Chicago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A little dig at Chicago there.
And I'm like, what? Why? Where did that come from?
You'll find that too here and there. Though usually it's within the state, or they'll take a dig at the next state over.
Right, right.
But yeah, you find that here and there.
That one just struck me as particularly odd because it's like, what do you have against Chicago? What, of all places, that far away. Um, there was also an explanation offered that people were seeing a donkey,
Yes.
and I thought that one was fairly amusing.
Yeah, because they were saying this donkey ate. Oh, I'm trying to think what it was that
it was doing very undonkey like things.
Yeah, yeah. It was eating like trees and other animals.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was
It had basically gone wild and become carnivorous.
right. Yeah. Oh yeah, it turns out only to be a wild and woolly jackass, the Capet monster. Some weeks ago, various stories were published concerning a strange monster, which was said to be roaming the canyons north of Capet Valley. So we're talking about the same area as that last article I read. This is in California. Some thrilling tales were told of its doings, the woodland male thus explains. At last there seems to be a satisfactory explanation offered of the mysterious animal that has so long been the terror to not only the nervous old maids and timorous damsels of fair Capet, but also of the brave stalwart males in the section. When we state on authority of E.B. Aldrich that the strange beast is nothing more than a small Maltese jack, which is a donkey. The nervous tensions of the valley of the fig and olive will doubtless relax. Now it is said that this jack, which is only about the size of a large dog, is one of the most voracious quadrupeds in the world. And as to his lungs, great heavens, when he brays, it is said that the echo of his hypochondriac roar reverberates through the melancholy stillness of Cache Creek Canyon like unto the doleful undulations of maddened thunder. Notwithstanding his terrorizing roar, however, his Maltese Highness is not now considered dangerous to human life, though he has been known to gourmandize on a full-fledged calf for breakfast, with a few tender lambs for dessert, and was turned at large some time ago from Casey Flat because of his diabolical inclination to chase men out of his corral. There may be some mistake about the stories of him climbing trees, though it is quite likely that if he ever started to make one of his meals from an ordinary oak tree, he would reach the top before his appetite became satiated. So yes, it's a meat-eating donkey who eats lambs and calves, and is
that makes
nowhere near the size of the things being reported. But hey, it's an explanation.
it makes way more sense than a wild man or some kind of ape. Yeah, crazy carnivorous donkey zonkey.
Yeah, about the size of a large dog, so it's not a particularly big donkey at that.
No. So another one of the ones that reminded me of the missing 411 stuff is on page 46. You have a story of a wild man who's trying to lure a kid into the woods.
Hmm. Yes, family is frightened by a strange man in the woods. This is from Redding, California. Roaming around in the vicinity of Buckeye in the old diggings district is a wild man with a proverbial long beard and flowing hair and stark naked. The women and children are afraid to go out of doors, and only the other day the family of H.E. Clausen were badly frightened by the approach of the madman near their home. One of the children was playing near the house when a stone fell near him. Again, we have a stone falling. Looking up, the child saw the wild man beckoning to him and making a peculiar sound with his mouth. The child ran into the house and informed his mother, who ran with her children to a place of safety. The wild man disappeared, and it is probable that an organized effort will be made to capture him. The impression is general that the wild man is the same being that made his presence unwelcome in the vicinity of Keswick some time ago.
So I mean that's just creepy in general.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the missing 411 cases and any of these cases, not just the ones David reports, is a lot of times, as David has noted, it's the last person in line or the first person in line when they're alone. And one of the things I noticed is that it almost seemed like people were being the last time they were seen, they were being distracted by something. Like a girl is looking at something off the side of the trail and then she gets left behind and they come back and they realize she's not with them. They go back and she's gone. So, I mean, something like that, if you see someone kind of peeking out around a tree or something, peeking out around a tree and trying to, get your attention quietly and being like, come here, even if you're not initially going to go there, it's enough to stop you and separate you from other people.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. And again, talking about, modern reports, they seem to be very fascinated with children. You get a lot of reports of them coming around the yards when kids are out playing or tapping on kids' bedroom windows and stuff, trying to get their attention. Really interesting reports of kids sort of playing and having them just watch in the window. I forget where I heard the encounter, but one kid was talking about when he smashed his toys together, would get very excited and kind of make sounds and so forth outside the window. Very, very interesting stuff, which, again, this continues today.
And if Josh was with us right now, he could explain how all that connects into fairy lore.
Yes, yes. And there's another one that's from Long Beach, I believe, where the creature comes into the window. The shaggy orangutan imposed murders in the rue morgue could have been no more horrifying in appearance than the man or beast who at 3 o'clock on a recent morning invaded the bedroom of 2 small girls in Long Beach. The tiny daughters of H.H. Thompson were asleep in their room in the Thompson home on 3109 Cordo Place when they were awakened by a man in the room. They screamed and huddled under the bedclothes in fear. Thompson, the father, heard the screams and rushed into the room just in time to see the most gorilla-like man he had ever seen climbing out of the window. Before the girl's father could reach the window, the man had dropped to the ground and escaped. Thompson says the man's head and face were so covered with long black shaggy hair that, with his immense size and ferocious stoop, he in every way resembled a large ape. The father arrived before anything had been stolen. The Long Beach police are hunting for a man of this ape-like description, but so far without success. So I found that really interesting because it's not the girls who gave the description of him looking like an ape, it's the father.
Yeah. And the girls didn't describe him, did they?
No. Apparently they, at least not in the article. Yeah. But if it was little kids saying, a girl climbed through the window, you might go, oh, maybe it's your imagination or something. But the fact that it's the father, and again, here we have it climbing into a children's room. Very, very creepy.
And there's also a number of accounts in the book that struck me as odd because these things were carrying guns.
Yeah, yeah. There's two or three in the book, which are very strange. Every now and then you'll get uh, clothing reports, and again, this continues into modern cases. I used to hate them because I thought it sort of made the reports seem less believable or disingenuous in some way. People report, it's this big hairy thing, but it's wearing this ripped up, flannel shirt or something. But now I find them incredibly fascinating, these reports. So in the Pennsylvania book and in the West Coast book, there's a handful of reports where people report them wearing clothes, which sometimes I think that might have been the the time period. You're talking about Victorian and Edwardian times. Maybe a naked guy or woman running around is a little too risque, so the editors or the reporter clothed them to, in the story. But sometimes maybe not. Maybe that is what people saw or what they thought they saw. But in the West Coast book, and this didn't happen in the Pennsylvania book, like you said, there's a few articles, like two or three, where they were carrying guns. One in which the creature was carrying a rusty musket of some sort, pointed it at the guy and pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. So you wonder if he picked it up from somewhere and thought, well, this is a boomstick, and didn't understand how it worked or what the case was. Very strange. There's a couple other encounters in the book where the creatures, and once again, this happens in modern reports, they seem to realize what guns are, or at least realize that they can do harm. Because when people point guns at them, that a lot of times they'll go bananas. No pun intended. They'll go get quite angry. That's when people get screamed at, or things get really aggressive. When hunters, seems like they're okay if the hunter's there, but when the hunter points the gun at it, that's when things tend to go bad.
Page 58, I wrote the wild man that isn't. I'm trying to remember what that was. I think that's the one where they wild man fades into thin air.
A raging wild man with mouth aflame, gloating eyes, and clad in upholstery of waving hair, has tormented the minds and inspired the fears of those in the Claremont district, was routed this morning by a posse under command of Deputy Sheriff Sweeney. The fearful nightmare that has racked the fearsome minds of the Berkeleys turned out to be a simple lover of wild nature who abides in the old Fish Ranch Canyon. He gives his name as Jack Hallowell, his occupation as gardener, his age is 45, and he is a bachelor. Hallowell lives in a dugout on a deep ravine far from the maddening crowd, and about 300 or 400 yards northeasterly from the Claremont Hotel. The recluse laughs at the assertion that he was the fearful apparition that has befrighted the vicinity of Claremont. So again, they're offering this explanation. Never mind that he doesn't match what people were saying they saw. It's good enough. It's like, okay, here's a guy who lives off the grid, so it was him. Again, this happens today. The witness I was talking about before, the fellow was I can't diagnose him with post-traumatic stress, but with continuing nightmares and symptoms of what seems like post-traumatic stress to me as a layman. He reported first that the police told him that he bumped into a guy wearing buckskin or animal skins, and he said, no way too big. And I think he said they ended up putting in the police report that he ran into a cow, and he grew up on a farm. He's like, I know what cows were. I worked with cows every day. This was not a cow. So
wow.
Yeah, I think sometimes, in modern cases, I think it's probably easier for like the report, the police, to put down.
Sure.
I don't think it's so much a grand conspiracy as it is just a lot easier for them to file the report if it's something known.
It starts on page 68. You actually did a show with Josh on this case, under Natural Curiosities, which is a very long story, and I recommend people go listen to your Strange Familiars episode.
I think it's
what's it called?
Sasquatch in the Fae, I believe.
Okay, and because that's a great analysis of this very strange story.
Yeah, and for fans of Josh here on Where Did the Road Go, he does the guest commentary on that article for me. He was when I read it, I went, "Ooh, this is Faye. This is Faye stuff." And I sent it to Josh. I said, "Hey, we do the guest commentary on this," and he agreed. I was much pleased by that. He said he probably could have gone on for about 10 more pages on it, and we do get into a lot more detail on the Strange Familiars episode. But it's a very strange story. Starts out what seems to be like a somewhat typical Bigfoot abduction. A guy and a young kid, I think he's a teenager, are out in the woods and they're looking for, I think, lost cattle. It's nighttime. The guy's asleep. The kid hears some kind of noise or screaming in the woods, heads off to see what's up, sees glowing red eyes, huge creature, grabs him, and they run off. And makes this left turn and becomes very strange. It almost sounds like if people are familiar with the Albert Osman story, the fellow who was abducted by Bigfoot creatures in Canada, I think in the 20s, although he didn't tell the story till the 60s, I believe, or the late 50s. But anyway, it starts out very much like that, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is very much like the Osman encounter. But then the creature takes him to an underground cave, and then there's a woman who's there who comes out and hands him a note. Very, very strange. He ends up climbing out of the cave after she warns him, if you stay here, you're going to be eaten. And wanders the woods for a few days and ends up, he finally runs into somebody and comes back home. But it's this very, very strange account that's very much like a trip into the Fae. A lot of these Fae stories, that the land of the fairy is underground, and that's where he goes. And there's eerie music and the other human who begs not to leave. That's already there. All of these are just you find in Fae encounters.
And there's a lot of crossover between some of these and Fey encounters as well. I mean, some of them just seem like what you would expect from an ape in the woods, but other ones, yeah, they have that crossover here and there.
Yeah. There's Josh is winning us all over to this.
um, let's see. So I wrote down page 80: Wild Man Eating Miners.
Yeah. So this was the up in this is Oregon, I believe.
Yeah, Polk County.
Yeah. Yeah, so the boogeyman has been seen over in eastern Oregon. They call it the kangaroo man. And they say the creature has the shape of a man, but is of enormous size and covered with hair. He's supposed to eat miners raw, without any salt, and has been seen to jump from one mountain peak to another, all the while emitting blood-curdling yells and spouting sulfurous flames from his nostrils. What kind of whiskey do they sell over in that country anyway? So, yeah, little jab there, little exaggeration. And again, I don't know, was he really, had he really eaten anyone, or are they just exaggerating? But they mentioned in several of these cases, several of the articles around the same time, the miners were very afraid of I don't know if it was just one creature or I would guess it's more than one creature, but they were terrorized. They said that, but it was the word they used by these creatures. Once again, these are miners in the 1800s in the westernmost part of the country. These were hard men. So for them to say they were being terrorized by something is, to me, that's something to note.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The on page 90, you talk about one of these encounters where people would hear someone crying for help, and they'd go there, and there'd be nothing there, and then afterwards they cited a wild man. And again, that kind of connects, I feel, into some of the missing 411 stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get sinister, I have often said that people report that it sounded like a woman screaming or even like a baby crying. And like if you wanted to draw someone out in the woods, a woman or a child in stress or in pain or in danger would be a great way to do it. And a lot of people report these things are fantastic mimics. That they'll call the names of their pets. The people had their own names called. But the other side of that is the whole poltergeist thing that we've talked
Yeah.
about before, um, which poltergeist phenomena, or what sounds like poltergeist phenomena, seems to follow these creatures around, or vice versa. Um, so when someone doesn't see a creature and they hear voices, uh, when they don't see a creature and they get things thrown at them, bad smells. You and Josh pointed it out, and it really changed my way of thinking. I don't know how long ago that was, but it was quite a while back. You guys pointed that out to me, and ever since then, I think, well, if they're not seeing a creature, these things do accompany. They do end up accompanying Bigfoot reports. But are we talking about Bigfoot doing these things, or are we talking about a sort of poltergeist phenomenon that also surrounds, the Bigfoot experience, the Bigfoot sighting, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. The wilderness poltergeist.
Yes, the wilderness geist.
um, yeah, and that's we see that in nature with things like coyotes. For people who aren't familiar with coyotes can sometimes make the sound of an injured animal.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's to lure in other animals who are either going to try and prey on the injured animal and then they attack as a pack, or something, or some similar animal which they can then, attack as a pack.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yeah. It's so, yeah. So if you want to get, think of these things as, sinister, it's fairly easy to do with stuff like that. People calling for help, or the baby crying is one of the creepiest ones, I think.
and you get that even outside of poltergeists, you get it with ghost encounters as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things that seems to transcend a lot of these different phenomena.
Right. Yeah. And are they the same thing, or do the situations that make one possible make the others more likely?
Yeah. Um, one of the ones that struck me, and you pointed out it may not have been what it sounded like, but on page 110, you talk about an encounter with a guy wearing a dark black suit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a weird description. But as you point out, they may have been seeing it at a distance, and it could have been hair that they were describing.
Yeah.
But it's almost like the dark black suit kind of makes me think of a ghost encounter more than a some kind of ape encounter.
Yeah. The thing, and I've started to get this very recently. The last Strange Familiars episode I did, there was a Bigfoot witness from Michaud State Forest in Pennsylvania, and he described what he saw as, I think he used the term like blacker than black, like impossibly black. And very shortly after that, I was contacted by another witness, again from Pennsylvania. He saw whatever he saw. He said its face was so black. He said it was disturbing. He said, I've never seen anything that black. Which
Like
is
absence of light black.
yeah, that's exactly how he described it. He said so black it was like an absence of light, and he said that more than anything else has disturbed him to this day. So that's the other reason when I saw that, he's wearing a black suit, and they said he has very black hair, a very black mustache. They said, um, maybe a man, and if they're saying it's a man, likely it was, but there was enough strangeness in that article where I thought, well, I'm going to throw it in there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, and that makes me think of like the different times I've seen shadow forms of any kind, because that is I've always called them liquid darkness, but they are as black as something could possibly be. I mean, because even at night you can see them and they stand out in the dark as darker than the dark.
That's very, very interesting.
So
So again, that now did they see Bigfoot, or did they see something more like what you're talking about?
right. Well, but the things I talked about, to me, they, like I said, they move like liquid. Or
Oh, okay.
the couple times I've seen figures, they've seemed like a normal person walking, and then they just dissolve.
Well, the moving like liquid is very interesting too, though, because people say that these things will move through the woods, but they don't, like, their head doesn't bounce. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they're cross country skiing or something through the woods. They just kind of very smoothly move through the woods. Very odd. You'd think, do they get some bounce if they have to step over, detritus or something on the ground? But people report just this, this flowing movement with them.
Well, clearly they're skinwalkers, and they are the spirits of shamans who are astral projecting and trying to make the white man leave this area.
Well,
you can't dismiss it.
I can't. I won't. That's some of the shows I do. People really want a definition from me. Yet another reason I love coming on Where Did the Road Go, because you will accept I don't know. I'm still interested in it. I still believe that it's something real that people are seeing, but I don't know what it is. And some people get very frustrated with that answer, but that's my only honest answer. And I think really it's the only honest answer anyone can give. I think certain people would like it to be an ape because it's a lot easier to talk about an ape than it is, an unknown. Other people would like it to be some sort of dimensional creature. And I get that thrown at me a lot. Is it moving in from another dimension? Maybe. I mean, that's a possible explanation, but until we know for sure, that's science fiction. That we can only say, maybe. We don't even know how other dimensions work. We can't really say that's what's happening.
We don't even know other dimensions exist necessarily. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
So I mean that's theoretical science, and that's been taken up. I mean, I think it was Keel who started that idea of ultra terrestrials. And it's not that it's a bad idea.
No,
until we can prove that there are other dimensions that we could move in and out of, then we can't prove that these things are interdimensional. It's just an interesting idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm happy to read those theories, and I like considering that as well. I mean, to me, it's very interesting, and it's plausible, but we can't say that's what's happening. We just can't. And no one has caught one of these. I don't think anyone ever will. I think we've had an incredibly long history with these creatures, and we've not caught one yet. Or when people do catch them, they tend to disappear very quickly. The people who say they've shot them, as with the Dead Man's Hole story, but in modern stories as well, the body's always gone. It never stays around. This is something that I think Patrick Harper could speak on very, very well. These guys report killing creatures. These hunters, they shot them, they killed them, and the body always disappears. Either they'll leave and come back, and presumably, other creatures took the body away. That's usually the explanation. Or some mysterious black van pulls up and takes the body, or a black helicopter or something. There's, they never end up with the body. The DNA tests always come back inconclusive. The hair samples always come back inconclusive. The footprints are the best we have. And the science just isn't going to accept a footprint. They're just not. They're going to, I think Jeff Meldrum has gotten them to admit that, yes, something real left a footprint. I think he's gotten that far because the work he's done with the foot, he's a specialist on primate foot anatomy. And he's identified features in these tracks that you'd basically have to be an expert of his level to fake. And even that, then you'd have to have the technology to fake it.
Right.
So I think he's gotten, real science, we'll put that in quotes, to at least admit that, yes, something real left these tracks, but without a specimen, they're not going to ever accept this. It's not going to happen.
Well, even if you admit something real left it doesn't tell you what it is.
Right. Well, that's without a specimen, they're not going to, they're not going to go that far. So there's something very, very strange about these creatures. And as much as people, would like to have a sample, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know why exactly, but
or like a lot of UFO stuff, we have samples. It's just that it's not anything that proves anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
It leaves us kind of just going, well, we got it, but it doesn't tell us anything useful.
Yeah. And that seems to be such a feature of dealing with all aspects of this stuff.
And And Patrick Harper, when I had mentioned Bigfoot to him, he said that, in his opinion, Bigfoot is probably just a big hairy daemon.
Well, it's as good as an explanation as any. And as I've said it before, he has put forth what to me is the closest thing to a working sort of explanation for the whole field of the paranormal.
Yes, yeah, but again, not proven, and that's the
No,
failing of it. And I don't know that we could prove it at this level.
and I think he would admit that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll be talking to him sometime soon. We just got to arrange schedules.
Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to that.
So
The book is Daemonic Reality. I guess we talk about it on here enough, but in case someone's just listening to this episode.
That's a must read if you want to get a real overview of the paranormal and how it may all fit together.
Yeah, it's written incredibly well. He's an excellent writer. He's not just an idea man. He's a really good writer.
So the last story I wanted to get into a little with you is the it's one of your favorites. It was on page 111. It was the Bosco.
Oh, the Bosco, yes. Now here's part of what I do is you have to figure out what they call these creatures, because I didn't call them Bigfoot. And again, most of the time it's wild man, sometimes it's gorilla, but a lot of times you'll get these local names. And that the last article or the one before, they called it kangaroo man. So you get these little local names because they didn't have, they didn't know what they were. They didn't have pop culture. At least Bigfoot wasn't in pop culture at that time. So you get these little local names, and they call this one Bosco. And I did a little research, and one of these traveling circuses had come through very recently, and they had a wild man in the show, and his name was Bosco. And his sort of thing that he did is he would eat all kinds of stuff. He would eat all kinds of crazy stuff, as part of his wild man act. So when they started seeing this creature, and it's very interesting, they saw it around the University of Washington in Seattle. They started calling him Bosco. So this is one of my favorite articles in the book because it has just so much sort of Bigfoot behavior and so much you find in other articles. From the Seattle Star, July 3rd, 1914. Bughouse Bosco, varsity wildman, makes lunches off dogs, bites off trees. Bughouse Bosco, the bushman, the terror of the University District, is still at large today, despite a determined search by the police yesterday. Bosco is the man who leaped upon an Italian workman on the Montlake Boulevard within 100 yards of the University Canoe House on Lake Washington yesterday morning. Not content with choking his victim with his claws, he threw a heavy piece of iron at him and nearly caved in the workman's ribs. But after that, he fled into the brush again. The Italian described him as a wild-eyed giant, clad much like Robinson Crusoe before he learned the art of tailoring. He says Bosco had long matted hair, forming a thatch on his head. His evil face is almost hidden by a tangled growth of black beard, through which long yellow tusks protrude. The workman would not go near the spot yesterday afternoon, but he stood across the roadway and pointed, when it became necessary to designate exact spots. He threw stones, but he would not approach the thicket from whence the wild man had sprung on him. Just at the edge of the thicket is a little plot of sand, and here the marks of bare feet were plainly visible. It was at this point that the scuffle occurred. The foreman for the Independent Asphalt Company, who declined to give his name, said that during his examination of the thicket shortly after the assault, he found several alder trees averaging 6 inches in diameter, lying across the path, with evidence that they had been bitten down by Bosco to delay pursuers. Motorcycle patrolman J.A. Thomas, with a member of the mounted squad, found evidence that Bosco had employed a large log to kill what appeared to have been a yellow dog near the lakeshore, about 200 yards south of the boathouse. Yellow hair lay here and there, and a few crunched bones, but no flesh. Thomas believes the wild man ate the dog. The log, measuring 2 feet in diameter, was broken in the middle. Evidence that a dog was following him was brought out in an interview with Mrs. Jack Ayrton, who lives near the boathouse and who was the only one who witnessed the encounter. A few minutes after the Italian had been attacked, she declares she saw a form slink out to the water's edge and then dart back again. A yellow dog with dirty hair followed. Miss Erlin was walking along the railroad track with a pail of water when the wild man attacked his victims. She saw him dig his talons into the man's throat, saw the Italian fight for breath, and heard him finally shriek for help. The wild man then fled. Last night, when Frank Swaps, fireman at the University Powerhouse, which is just across the NP tracks from the thicket, went down to adjust the electric pump near the boathouse. He was startled by a weird, unearthly cry, which seemed to come from the lake grass in the swamp at the head of the bay. Swaps doesn't believe in ghosts, and after a moment he shrugged his shoulders and went inside. But when he came out in a few moments, he was just in time to see the wild man trot noiselessly down the railroad bank from the direction of the swamp and plunge into the lake, not 50 feet from where he stood in the shadows. Swaps waited patiently, and soon Bosco emerged and squatted on the bank. He seemed to be nibbling. Creeping closer to investigate, Swaps encountered a twig, which snapped. The wild man fled. Swaps found a half-eaten fish. Night before last, the wild man peered into the engine room door of the powerhouse about 10:30. Engineer William Auckland attempted to coax him inside, but he became suspicious and went away. Auckland chased him to the tracks, but lost him in the darkness. Bursar Herbert T. Condon of the university has been greatly puzzled the past few days by the discovery of huge footprints in the asphalt walks on the campus, impressed there before the asphalt hardened from the heat of the day. Last night he declared he believed them to be the footprints of Bosco. So there's so much in this article. He's peeking in the window. He's attacking a dog. He's the breaking trees down behind him, which we hear about often. It's a display of strength. So I don't think they bite them. I think that was conjecture in the article. But people have seen them break trees down behind them, sort of as they walk, which is that's a primate behavior. It's a display of strength if they want to warn someone away. There's just so much in this one article that points to these modern behaviors that I find incredibly fascinating. Those encounters around the university there went on for years.
Yeah. And no one, of course, ever caught it.
No. There's articles in the book that talk about the football teams out looking for it, and a certain I think it was a pro golfer or something. He declared he was going to find it, and at some point the university issued a warning. They said women should walk in groups of 3s, even in groups of 2. They weren't safe. There's a story where it chased one woman and she ended up hitting it with her purse, I think.
Or suitcase or something. Yeah,
brave lady. But yeah, it went on for years and years. I don't know when it finally ended. The footprints in the asphalt is really interesting. I wonder if there's exists some photo or some record of those footprints, because they're talking about immense footprints and something pretty heavy. Even if the asphalt's hot, it'd have to be pretty heavy, I think, to leave a footprint in the asphalt. So I wonder if anyone ever, made some sort of photograph or record of those. It's 1914, so cameras weren't super popular, but they were around.
Yeah, or if the asphalt still exists in some form.
Yeah.
Buried under something somewhere. Of course, no one would know if it did. They would dig it up, not think anything of it, and toss it.
Sure. Yeah.
But all right. Well, the book is Bigfoot, West Coast Wild Men by Timothy Renner, oddly enough.
Yes, and you find it on Amazon if you want, or other bookstores can order it. If you want signed copies, you can come directly to me. My contact info is strangefamiliars.com. All that goes right to me. So any contact info there that you find, that'll go right to me.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. This was it's definitely an interesting book, and it was an interesting conversation.
Well, thanks for having me back.
And a special thanks to our Patreons who are donating at the $10 or above level. Christopher Sheehan, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Russell Wilcoxon, Chris Elmquist, Scott Morris Everett, Super Inframan, Patricia Giaquinta, Lauren Melton, John Eddy, Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It's a fun book to read, so I totally recommend picking up a copy. If you found that at all interesting, there's a whole lot more in there. A couple of weeks ago, someone had sent me this auto poem, and this was sent to me by a guy over in the Netherlands named Keys. I assume that's how he pronounced that. I could be wrong. But he said that this poem kind of wrote itself, popped into his head, and he wrote it down. and he sends it along, and it kind of feels like something I would have written. So he said I could read it out to all of you. So here we go. 21 centuries mankind has tried, ridiculously framed out of sight. Few now know eon, forgotten measurement of life in time, rarely experiencing it to be yours or mine. But we, all of us, remember. Once these ages disappear, we succeed. Memories of all, hated and dear, a field of one. Then perhaps we'll remember we were never gone. And I thought that was kind of cool. So thank you for sending that along, Keys. And I hope I'm saying your name right. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.